Hi everyone, today I wanted to talk about quarantine notifications in Exchange Online and the delay that it takes to actually notify the users. So today will Microsoft provide a solution where we can send notifications. Usually we set it up in the form of a digest. The problem is that digest takes 4 hours, or 4 hours is the shortest possible time that you can get it to the user. So sometimes they've got mail waiting around in their spam filter for ages, and in some cases that's fine. But let's take the scenario, say you've got a sales mailbox and you need to get that those sales orders processed as soon as possible, and in those cases perhaps 4 hours is just too long. You've already missed the boat with the sale and you're losing money essentially. I've come up with an Azure function that can overcome that. It's just going to search the quarantine for a particular email address, and if it finds email in the quarantine, in this case sales, then we're just going to fire off an email to maybe, in our case it's going to be an individual person, but you could equally fire it off to a distribution group. So let's jump into it and take a look. I just quickly want to show you over in my GitHub, and I'll put the link to this repo in the description below. There's a few files here at play. So what we're going to do is we're going to deploy a user assigned identity for an Azure function. And I just wanted to quickly show you what's happening there just briefly. So if you grab this file and edit basically these two fields, then the rest of it you can just run, and we'll go through this. The other file here is the PowerShell code that's going to form the actual function itself. And again, these are the things that you're going to need to edit. You'll see me doing it, so you should just be able to follow along. Finally, this PowerShell script here is just so we can generate a email that's definitely going to get caught in the spam, so we can validate that our function's working. That's it for GitHub. Let's jump into the setup that we've got and into the Azure Portal. Okay, so in Exchange, you can see that we've got our scenario here. So we've got a sales mailbox, a shared mailbox set up here. That's where we're going to send our spam, and I've got a quarantine notifications mailbox, and that's where the email is going to come from. And in our particular case, I'm going to notify myself. So instead of sending it to the sales team, maybe I'm the head of sales and I want to get it. So I'll be the recipient of the notification. Let's get into the Azure Portal and set up the function and the managed identity that's going to have our permissions. Okay, so we're in the Azure Portal, and you can see I've got a resource group here already set up, and I've got got a notification function already working. But let's just step through as if we're starting from scratch. But I'm going to chuck my resources in this resource group so it's easy for me to clean up afterwards. First thing to do is jump over to managed identities, and we're going to create a new managed identity. I could have added this all into the code, but I was rushing to get this ready so I could record it for the weekend. So we're going to dump our managed identity into that resource group that I just pointed out, and hopefully here we go. So I'm going to call this one the UAI for user assigned identity sales spam notification. So let's just go ahead and create that, let it validate. Okay, and it looks like we're good to go with our user assigned identity. And probably all we're going to need from this is the client ID, and I'm going to save that to my clipboard now. And I want to show you that identity in the in Entra ID. It shows up in enterprise applications. I'll quickly show you where. Essentially, it is very similar to an enterprise application. If I just change this filter here to managed identities, and let me filter to anything with UAI just so you can see. So here's our new one here. Sales spam notification, and there's nothing special about it. It has no permissions or anything like that. But what we're going to do is go ahead and get our permissions set up. So you can see it's got no access to anything at the moment. If we just jump over to VS Code, and we'll fill in some details and get going. Okay, so over in VS Code, and I've got the files from my GitHub here. I'm just having some problems with some extensions, so I'll just get rid of that. You can see that I've filled in the managed identity name here of sales spam notifications, and I've put in my tenant ID, and I've gone ahead already and connected to Microsoft Graph, and I've also, well, at least I think I've connected to that, and I've also connected my AZ account. Let me just reconnect that Microsoft Graph, make sure that we are actually connected. If you've not connected to these scopes before, you may get prompted to accept some permissions. If you do so, then just accept that and we'll carry on. And let me just check that I am connected to get AZ context. Okay, and I've got some context of the subscription where we've put our identity. So I won't rerun that. The rest of, if you fill these two things in terms of permissions, you could just run all of it. You could just run the whole script and it's going to be all good. You don't need to understand it. But for this video, I'm just going to step through what we're doing. Just putting the managed identity. Oh, I haven't run this. Let me rerun that. Okay. Redo that. Live demo issues. Cool. Okay, so I've got the managed identity ID. What I'm going to do is I'm going to give an app role, which comes from the Office 365 Exchange Online app, to my managed identity. And I think I might make a separate video maybe next week about how these permissions and all that work and where you can find them and how you can apply them. We'll just go into a bit more detail perhaps in a separate video. But this first section here is basically giving the managed identity and there you go, the permission's been applied. It's giving the managed identity the right to log in essentially via the API to Exchange Online. This second piece here, I'm going to give our managed identity the role of Exchange Administrator, and that's so it can churn through the quarantine and take actions in the quarantine. Okay, that's worked. And then finally here, I've actually got a for each loop here, applying all of these permissions, of which there's only one. So I realized this could just be one command, but I set it up in this loop because some functions I'm giving several permissions and I just want to apply them all at once. But the permissions here I'm applying from the Microsoft Graph permissions, and this ID here relates to Microsoft Graph's mail.send. It's an application permission. The delegated permissions are applied in a slightly different way. And like I said, I might go into those details about how you find these permissions and apply them suitable for an Azure function in a lot more detail in a separate video. But for now, let's just run that. And that's our permission set up for our managed identity. So let's jump back over to the portal and just take a look at all that. Cool. Okay, so we're back with our managed identity. Let's just refresh the permissions on that. And you can see now we've got the Microsoft Graph permission for mail.send and the API permission for Exchange Manage as app. Now let's jump over to back to the resource group, I think, and we will deploy a new function. So let's create a new function, and I'm going to call it sales spam notification, let's say. Cool, so we'll go with func for function, sales spam notification. Just going to run this as PowerShell. And on the consumption tier, the rest of everything I think should be cool. So let's just go ahead and create that. Okay, and that's finally managed to deploy. So let's jump into that function. And there's a couple of things we need to do here. So before we configure the code for the function, let's just go to our app files. And jump into the requirements. And this is how we give our function some PowerShell modules if they're not installed by default. So I'm going to give it the Exchange Online Management, and I'm going to give it version 3.4.0, which I think is the most current version today, and just save that. And then when our function runs for the first time, it's going to install this module. So we might see on our first run that things go a little bit slow. I'll speed that all up in the edit so you don't have to watch it. And then the other thing that we want to do in this for the setup of this function is just go to identity, and we want to associate our user assigned identity that we created before. The system assigned identity, I'm sure, will work. It's just when I set this up the first time about 6 or 7 months ago, some of the documentation wasn't quite right with the system assigned identity. I think it's fixed now. Anyway, let's choose our brand new identity, associate that to our function, then we can grab the files for the code. So let's go back to overview, and we'll give it a trigger. And while that loads, let's just jump over. Oh, here we go. Let's create the function. Go with the timer trigger. So we're going to run this on a schedule, and our schedule is going to be not every 5 minutes, but in our case, I want to check the quarantine, let's say every 30 minutes. So let's create that. And that means that I want my function to, when it runs, to look back at the quarantine only at the most recent 30 minutes so that we don't alert our user for the same email over and over again. So while that loads, I'm just going to jump over here and go to quarantine function, and I'll go to the raw file there, and then I can just Control A, select all, Control C, and we can paste that code into here. And Azure Portal is going really slow today, so what I'll do, I'll speed along those load screens in the editing because it's just so slow. Now that does include the timer, so you can paste over, just completely delete all of that, so you've got a blank, paste that in, and then we can just edit the variables at the top. So just the section that we need to edit. So this particular tenant that I'm in is called Getch, and let's just quickly grab the tenant ID. Bear with me a second. Oh, apologies. I don't actually need the tenant ID. It's the managed identity client ID that I need, which I think I copied before, which is that. Let's double check on that. Finishing with 025. Just go to here. Finishing, yes, that looks right. Okay. So we're going to have the email come from quarantine@kristurk.com, and I want to email myself, so I'm going to have Kris@kristurk.com. The email subject's fine. The greeting or salutation or whatever it is just going to be "Hi Kris," and the search pattern that I'm going to look for in the quarantine headers is going to be sales, or anything to sales at. Will get picked up. There's one other thing you may want to edit in your own one, and that's if you just scroll on down here, there's the rest of the email greeting that gets created. I think it's fairly generic, so you could probably just use this, but if you want to customize the email greeting, then the email body, then go ahead and edit that. But you see I'm pulling in the greeting "Hi Kris" into the main body, which I thought that's kind of all I need to edit. So that should be it. We'll save that and we should be good to go. Oh, the other thing is, notice I've got the frequency set to 30. That's the default thing I've put in the code. If you want to run your function every 15 minutes or 5 minutes, then just go ahead and change that to be in line with the cron job or the scheduler that you set up, timer trigger. So let's save that and give it a run. Of course, I just realized that that's not actually going to catch anything because we haven't generated a spam email. So The first time that runs, it's going to need to install the Exchange Online Management module anyway. Well, it's done it and it's connecting, so it's going to find nothing. But we can see we've connected to Exchange Online. It's found zero items in the quarantine in the last half an hour and none that match our search parameter. So let's jump over to VS Code and we'll send we'll create a spam email. Okay, so you can see that I've edited my variables here so we can fire off a few emails, and I've actually already fired them off, but I just wanted you to see that I'm pretending to be orders@kristurk.com and sending to sales@kristurk.com. Jumping back over into Firefox, and you can see I've sent off a few here. So we've got some emails in our spam filter, and if I just clear this and run our function now that we actually have something in the spam, it should pick it up. Cool, okay, so we're connecting to Exchange Online. And I can actually, I've already got the emails, so I can see that the logs from the function are a bit slow. So the function runs within like sort of a second, but we can see that we've found two messages here that match the header. So we've got 3 messages in the quarantine in the last 30 minutes, 2 that we want to email about. And if I jump over to my mailbox, you can see that I've got 2 emails to say, hi Kris, you've got this notification, you've got an email in the spam, sorry, and here's the details. So received it this time from these people, and if I'm expecting that, I can now go tell IT that should be released. That's all I really wanted to cover off today. I think next week what I'll jump into in a little bit more detail is in the function how we're accessing the permissions that we've given, so how we're logging into Exchange Online, and also how we're actually grabbing the access token that we need. It was quite complicated to work out, so if you're interested in that, because it can apply to many other scenarios, lots and lots of scenarios, then catch you next week. Until then, have a good Easter.